Welcome to Kentucky.
The birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and built on the largest cave system in the known world. The home of Daniel Boone, Hunter S. Thompson, horse racing, and bourbon.
But when the hour grows late, the bluegrass state becomes the breeding ground for realms beyond those familiar to the human race. In the east, ghosts, spirits, and ethereal entities roam the hills and hollers.
In the north, Mothman beats his wings along the banks of the Ohio River.
To the west, small green creatures stalk farmhouses and disappear without a trace when shot.
While in the south, the energy of the Veiled Witch is palpable just over the border. Joining with us as we investigate just what goes bump in the bluegrass night.
And ask the question, how many coincidences are too many? There's no need to check the clock.
There's no need to check the clock. Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion.
And it's midnight.
It's midnight. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the midnight hour. Thank you for listening. My name's Ben.
I'm Steven.
Last week, as you may remember, we, as we were sitting down to record it, the Strange Lights over New York City had, just appeared. Had you heard anything more about that?
I have not heard any more about it.
They're claiming that they are a power, what are those?
Like a transformer.
Transformer. They're claiming a transformer exploded. But if you look at the photos that me and you were looking at.
Yeah.
Right before all the other photos started being posted, and now there are photos of of it happening on the ground and flames coming up from the ground. But the photos that you and I saw initially, there was nothing going on the ground. It was totally and utterly in the sky.
Exactly. Yeah, the videos that Keith Oberman posted and other people's posted from afar was definitely, it was lighting up the sky,
right.
And it looked like the Northern Lights. Only it was over New York.
Very much so. So, yeah, now they're claiming that this was all a power transformer. Con Edison, the big power provider in New York, they're claiming that one of their power transformers blew, which it totally could have. I don't want to come off as one of those people that thinks every, Tesla missile launch is a UFO, which I don't know if that wasn't a UFO either. But just a lot of strangeness with that case this week, and with them totally, and everybody was posting about it. Everybody was wondering what it was. There's an excellent article from the Atlantic talking about how, our history of coming together and looking at weird shit in the sky, and how this is another prime example of like that archetypal, humans coming together to look at some weird shit.
Right.
And they even talk about like the 50s Washington sightings when the UFOs went over the White House.
And,
They talk about all that. But this week, we are going to get into a little more of Kentucky history and of the strange things that are happening around Kentucky by taking a look at several of the strange one-off cryptids, I guess. A lot of them are one-off. But then some of them aren't so one-off. A lot of them occur again and again and again. Like the dogmen, we have a really big dogman problem around Kentucky.
Right.
And the goblins.
And it seems like these are the same type of creature is spotted all over the state.
Very much so. Very much so in different positions. A lot going on with the cave systems in Kentucky. And it almost seems like in a lot of these stories of these different creatures revolve around these caves and revolve around, something to do with the caves. Even so much so as the ones that don't, you can track their history back somewhere with a cave. Exactly.
And, well, it kind of goes back to the national park thing. Mammoth Cave is a national park.
Oh, dude, I hadn't thought about that.
Land Between the Lakes is a national recreation area.
Huh.
And then, you get over in eastern Kentucky, it's Daniel National Forest.
Dude.
Yeah.
Almost makes you wonder, and this is another crazy outlandish theory, but it almost makes you wonder if they weren't like, look, extra-dimensional creatures, we will give you these places. Take them.
Yeah.
Just stay there. Don't come out.
Yeah.
And then, obviously they're going to come out.
It's almost kind of like how they did the Native Americans with the reservations. Said, here's your land, stay within these boundaries.
Damn, dude. Which, I honestly, with the Native Americans, it was either come out of these boundaries and we'll kill you or put you in prison. With extra dimensionals, you gotta wonder, is there anything that they can do to them if they overstep their boundaries?
I tell you, a group of people that we probably, I don't know if they'd talk to us, but it is probably the Amish down the road here.
Dude, I
wonder if they would have any, like, tales or, folklore.
Makes you wonder what their religious views on the subject would be, though.
Oh, I'm sure they're demons or the devil.
Yeah.
Which, I'm not very probable.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're not demons or the devils, so.
And a lot of stuff we could talk about tonight, with the caves systems, and a lot of people, that's kind of the beliefs from the people in the,
Very much so. It's that whole archetype of, just like we were talking about before we started the show, if it comes from the underground, it comes from hell.
Right.
And it's some type of demon or some type of creature from hell or from,
Yeah.
But we're going to take a quick moment just to let you guys prepare yourself for this, get your mind ready for this wormhole we're about to go down. Because even on this show, when I firmly thought, well, we'll just read some case files and we'll freak people out real good, there are some startling connections through all of this. And there's also some connections to other stuff that we've talked about on the show previous to this. So we're going to talk about the Land Between the Lakes monster, which we mentioned in our first episode of this season, and how, like I said previous, and I will probably say this again, Kentucky has a really bad werewolf problem, or dogman problem, or whatever these things are, which we'll get into, but we're going to touch on some more of the stranger creatures and the stranger entities that have been seen around the bluegrass region. But first we're going to take a real quick break, and we'll be right back after this. Start things off tonight, like I said, we're going to be talking about some of these lesser known and more one-off Kentucky cryptids. Not all of these are one-offs, though. And actually, as I kept digging into it, I don't really think any of these, with the exception of maybe this first one here, are one-offs. It seems like they all pretty much have more than one sighting, or people have saw them repeatedly. They're just not talked about a lot. They're not.
Yeah, they're not discussed kind of openly.
Right.
And every once in a while you'll find a mention of them in some type of folklore book on Kentucky, or maybe, if you buy a book about Mammoth Cave,
right,
ghost stories, or even, just some random ghost story book of Kentucky, you'll maybe find one short story that mentions these things.
Yeah.
If you go to the internet, like old, back searches of message boards and stuff, every once in a while you'll see some stuff. But just doing a quick search here on the internet, we've got cave creatures in Custer, Kentucky, which is up around,
Custer?
I think it's up there in Breckinridge County, outside of, Northern Kentucky.
There's actually a case in here. I don't know if it's cave creatures, but there's a Breckinridge case in some of the stuff that I've got for tonight. But
right, yeah. And then, of course, there's Bigfoot in Glasgow.
All kinds of Bigfoots.
The Hopkinsville monster. Ashland River monster.
I've heard of that. I haven't really dug into that, but I've heard of it.
And there's actually a monster that they discussed, the Green River monster, runs through Mammoth Cave. It's in the book.
And these are water monsters, right?
Yeah,
like these
yeah, like Loch Ness type creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got another in Breeding, Kentucky, which is over in Adair County. Bigfoot sign over there. And, of course, the Chupacabra in Bardstown, the guy killed. Slender Man in Burkesville.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, and then Clay County, Bigfoot sighting, and then we've got, just different various things to the state.
It's like you and I were talking about before the show, and we'll get into all this in just a second, but there is a very real and identifiable phenomena of dogmen or Sasquatches or large hairy hominid creatures of some type killing and eating livestock or just killing livestock. And I mean, this is repeated. This is, the Monroe County massacres that we talked about in episode 1.
Exactly.
There's a case in here tonight, several cases in here tonight talking about that. We have a very real, again, for the third time this evening, a very real werewolf problem in Kentucky. Like, there are dogmen everywhere.
And this goes from the western part of the state, far western part, all the way to the edge of Ashland and Pikeville on the border, North Virginia and West Virginia.
The eastern part of the state. Yeah. Goes all across the state. And not only that, but with these dogmen, we've got the goblins. These little creatures who, the main sighting of them, of course, and we'll get a little more into this later at the end of the show, but the main sighting of these creatures, of course, was in 1955 in Hopkinsville when they supposedly crashed in a UFO. But as we saw from some of the reading we've been doing, there's reports of them maybe before that in the cave systems. So, we also have a serious goblin problem in addition to the dogmen. Yeah,
it's all kind of cryptids or creatures that's in Kentucky, which Kentucky, again, is like a unique state.
Very much so.
We have, you go out in the western part and it kind of flattens out into the plains.
Right.
And the further east you go, you form into the Appalachian, the mountains.
We do have a very unique geography.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a really good point. And I mean, but it's like you and I were saying before the show, I mean, this whole state is just messed up with cryptids and weird things that people may only see once, or they may see the same thing dozens of times, or they may see it once and then somebody down the road see it once. And, as in one case, which we'll get to a little later on in the episode, and we'll definitely get to next week, in Hellier, Kentucky, of people seeing this shit all the time, up to a point where they saw a UFO in the sky for all afternoon.
Yeah.
A huge, massive UFO all afternoon one day. So
in Hellier, is over in Pike County. It's a small town over there. And, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It's in the mountains. And, there's a documentary getting come out next week about it.
By Greg and I think his wife's name is Dana. I hate to get his wife's name wrong. Which I met them at CryptidCon this past summer and actually asked them about this case. And he said, well, just get ready because there's about to be a lot more come out on this case. And I didn't know what he meant at the time. And now that I see this Hellier documentary, it looks like he's going to bring out some pretty explosive stuff on these.
And that's awesome. I look forward to seeing it next week. Can't wait to watch that. Because, Pikeville's been kind of, reports of strange activity going on.
For years.
Goblins.
Right.
And that whole border of Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. It goes all the way up to Ashland, Prestonsburg. The whole area there is.
And you and I had mentioned that, as well. That's also or we had mentioned this on a previous episode, and I think we had even alluded to it in maybe, the Simulated Universe episode was the Octavia Hatcher haunting. Haunting, is that probably the right word for that incident? But how that occurred in eastern Kentucky.
Right.
How there's a lot of these strange supernatural entities and incidences that go on in the hills and hollers over there.
Yeah, just oddness of things. And, of course, that's where the Hetfield McCoy future place right there in Pikeville. And lots of interesting things in the area in eastern Kentucky. It ain't just all coal mine and
well, and we'll definitely get into this a little later, but one of my favorite quotes from Greg Newkirk when he was going to investigate the Hellier thing was, and honestly, this quote kind of exemplifies Kentucky on a large, or the Kentucky people, the humility of people in Kentucky that see these strange things. He was talking to this man from Hellier who was one of the witnesses to this 4-hour-long UFO incident. And of course, as with everything, when asked for an explanation, the people of Hellier were told that this was a satellite, and that the media on the incident posted a photo of a satellite, and everybody in the town agreed that this was not what they saw. It was not at all this thing. And this guy tells Greg, he says, now I know that we mountain folk ain't the most educated people in the world, but I know what we saw wasn't no damn satellite.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not playing into any Kentucky stereotypes here, but people that live in the mountains, people that live in these remote regions where this shit's happening, and it's not always remote regions. Sometimes it's in the middle of cities like Louisville and stuff, as we'll get into in a minute. But these people that live in these remote regions, they're used to living in these remote regions. They know what's out there. Yeah. They know it from experience, not from, you know what I mean? So when they see something that is not a part of their normal everyday existence, they know that it's not supposed to be there. So
exactly, and and that's the thing, is that they know it's normal in their area. You can't take somebody from the city or outside of the state and come there and say, "Oh, that's normal what you're seeing,"
right? Because they know what's normal. Yeah. They live there. They're there. Right. Exactly.
And it's kind of one of the people that I listen to a lot of the music of is Sturgill Simpson, and that one song of Turtles All the Way Down, he has that line about reptile aliens made of light.
Yeah. Dude, and he's from
Jackson.
Yeah, is that in Eastern?
Yeah, it's over in Eastern Kentucky, right close to Popeville.
There you go, man. Yeah. And isn't he the one who, he did the interview with Damien Eccles too, didn't he?
I think so, yeah.
He was the one that actually got us interested in Damien Eccles in the first place.
Yeah. I think, he is, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Eastern Kentucky is full of folk magic, obviously.
Right.
And full of esotericism and full of a culture and full of paranormal incidences. And I mean, that traces back, to the history of, Irish and Scottish immigrants coming to Kentucky in the first place and bringing fairies and magic and all of that with them. So, I mean, it's, to me, these creatures have survived in these hills. And I mean, this is very much American Gods-esque, where, we brought these creatures with us when we immigrated, which is obviously not the case. It's Native American cultures had these creatures as well. But, I think when these Irish and Scottish immigrants brought these stories of fairies and brought these stories of whatever with them, of this paranormal from Europe, they kind of amalgamated the stories of the Native Americans, and either we realized that we were seeing the same things there as we do here and as these Native Americans are seeing, or it took on some weird kind of consciousness on its own where it became, an amalgam of these two things. Yeah. But regardless, something has survived in these hills for a long, long time.
Yeah, and something is still out there because people still, to this day, have experiences.
Right, are still seeing it, are still... But with that being said, let's hop into some cases.
All right, let's go for it.
Cases. We're going to start tonight with an especially odd case, but once you start digging, it's not that odd. It's happened before countless of times. Stephen actually turned me on to this case. It's the case of the Kentucky Gravedigger. He's an interesting little entity made up of a lot of different creatures, it seems like. Did you find anything when you were...
Not much. It's kind of hard to find information on it.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe it's a mixture between like a dogman or a werewolf.
Right.
That's going around.
He's got very bat-like features in the face, they said, like the turned up nose and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's almost, a hybrid between those two.
Yeah. Very odd looking creature.
Yeah. And it goes around and will dig up cemeteries.
Yeah. Dig up graves. I found one report only on this creature. And it was from a guy, it's a website, and a lot of this episode is going to be us reading from case files, and us reading case reports. They're very interesting case reports, but I just want to start out by saying that everybody who wrote these case reports, don't want to plagiarize your work, not trying to steal your work. We're very interested in your work, very interested in talking to you. If you want to get in touch with us and talk to us about it, that would be awesome. But a lot of this episode is going to be casework and case files. But with that being said, this case file comes from a man by the name of Dale A. Drennan, who has been in the cryptozoology field for the past 30 years. and has worked with names like Ivan T. Sanderson, who's written a lot of really good books on UFOs. I've got a couple of his books, and just other high strangeness. But Drennan has a degree in anthropology from Indiana University and is a freelance artist and writer. His motto, which it has listed on the page here, and I like this, so I'm going to read it, comes from Ambrose Paré, the father of modern surgery, in his refutation of fake unicorn horns. The motto is, I would rather be right and entirely alone than wrong in the company with the rest of the world. So that's Dale Drennan's motto, just some background information on this investigator. But, so supposedly this Kentucky Gravedigger sighting happened in Boyle County.
Which is Danville.
Yeah. Which is Danville, yeah.
Just
Danville.
up the road a piece.
Very close to us. So it happened in 1970. And I'm gonna go ahead and read the full case report here. It's a little long, but, it's interesting for sure. And I think everybody will find it kind of interesting. So, again, this happened in Boyle County, Danville, in 1970. And this is a report from the actual witness. They have him listed here as TW, but it says his real name is on file. So, me and my friend went fishing one morning. It was the spring of 1970. We had to walk a few miles east of the L&N Railroad tracks from Shelby City, Kentucky. It is now Junction City, Kentucky. We would sneak into this pond to bass fish. I had to be home before noon one day, so I started to back by myself and left my friend fishing by the pond. On the way back down the tracks, this creature landed on the tracks in front of me. When I say it landed, I mean jumped, because all I saw was a blur, and then there it was. It stood about 4 feet tall, and stood or squatted on 2 legs. It was covered in real fine fur on its body. It had a little round head that moved like an owl's head, almost in circles. It had little round eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. Its teeth were almost transparent, kind of like a bat's. It kind of favored a bat in the face. It had small ears and a small nose. The thing didn't have any lips, just teeth. Its arms looked like they came out of its chest and they were spindly. It had long fingers and a thumb on each hand with long claws. Its arms didn't have any hair or fur on them. They were slick and oily looking. The thing couldn't see good in the daylight because it squinted a lot, and it never did see me when it landed in front of me. It acted like it was watching for the trains. It would rub its tiny head on its arm every now and then. It looked right at me and couldn't see me, and I was only about 30 or 40 feet from it. I could see its fur moving. The creature never made a sound. I was dumbfounded. I've never saw anything like it before and haven't since. I wasn't scared at first, but I wasn't really sure what to expect. I had a tackle box with me in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, but I did have my hunting knife on me. As I tried to switch my fishing rod over to my other hand so I could get to my hunting knife, I rattled my tackle box, and that's when this thing heard me. It leaned forward and squinted its eyes, and when it saw me, it reared back and kind of puffed up. I thought it was going to attack me, so I jerked my knife out. When I did, this thing took off so fast it was like a blur. In one leap or jump, it cleared a fence of about 40 feet away and was gone. I shook my head because I couldn't believe how fast this thing could move. It took off running up to where it leaped the fence, but I never saw it again. I never did see this thing's legs because it squatted all the time, but they sure were powerful. This thing could have easily gotten to me if it wanted. I believe it only comes out at night, and just by chance I got to see it. Maybe it was headed to its home or den after a night of hunting or whatever it does. I have thought about it and believe it burrows into the ground like a groundhog, because not far from where I saw this thing is an old family cemetery plot where slab graves and a rock wall around it. There are huge holes all around the cemetery under the graves. If a groundhog had dug these, they couldn't see anything sneaking up on them because of the wall around them. But it could still be groundhogs, I guess. My grandmother told me of a thing the old people call a gravedigger, and it moves real fast and digs in the graveyards, but I don't know. I know I saw this strange creature, and it has to stay somewhere. Another man I know saw it one night run across the road in front of him, and it only paused for a second to look at him, and then it was gone. The way he described it, it was just like what I saw. He said he's never seen anything move so fast in his life, especially on 2 legs. This was also on the L&N Railroad tracks about 12 miles from where I saw it. It was in Parksville, Kentucky, where he saw it. The strange thing, it was near a cemetery also. That's where it came from when it ran in front of him. When I saw this creature, it was a beautiful spring morning, the sun was shining, and I watched it for what seemed to be 10 minutes or more. I could have watched it longer if I hadn't made any noise. If only I'd had a camera. So, that's the initial witness statement on this creature. But then, in a follow-up phone interview with Bigfoot investigator Bart Noonley, Bart says he spoke to TW on the evening of March 31st, 2006. And when pressed for more details, he was quick to supply them. The creature's arms looked like they came right out of its chest. It didn't have shoulders. I couldn't see its legs because it was squatted and feet and legs were hidden by a rail. When it landed in front of me, it crouched down. Its legs couldn't have been very long, but they were powerful to move like it did. It didn't have a tail. I couldn't make out the pupils of its eyes. Its eyes were very small and round, and they were very dark. Maybe not completely black, but almost. The face looked mean and curious. The thing blinked a lot. It would squint its eyes as if it couldn't see very good in the daylight. Its snout or nose didn't protrude. It had a pug nose and was dark brown, no fur on it. It did favor a bat in the face. The teeth were razor sharp and very close. It had perfect teeth and a bunch of them. They were also clear. I guess they looked like that because they were so sharp and thin, like a bat's teeth. It looked like they were all the same length, but the upper teeth almost covered up the lower ones. It had a fat body, its head looked too small for its body, and there was no neck. When it finally saw me, it leaned forward quite a bit and squinted at me like it was trying to make out what I was. Then it was gone like a speeding bullet. This thing turned like an owl's head, almost in complete circle. It had long, slender arms and very long fingernails with long, black, sharp claws. Actually, they looked like fingernails. It had knuckles on its fingers. There were 3 fingers and a thumb. Its skin on its arms looked oily and real dark brown, and the color of used motor oil. Its fingers moved constantly. Its fur was real fine. I could see it moving when the wind blowed. I got really worried when it leaned forward to look at me, and then when it did see me, it leaned way back, almost like it swelled up, and then it was gone in a flash. His parents and grandparents knew the thing as well, he told me, and believed it to survive by eating the flesh of dead bodies. It was an extremely rare occasion to see one, his parents told him, and they also believed them to be nocturnal animals. Though it may sound a bit folkloric, there is often some truth to much folklore. Perhaps creatures such as these are responsible for the ghoul legends of old. There is no doubt, however, that with such sharp teeth and lightning quickness, these things could eat pretty much whatever they chose to. So, interesting thing there, his parents and grandparents both told him that they had heard of this thing before, that other people had heard of it, that they had seen it, but that it was very rare to see one in the daytime.
Yeah. And I kind of did some searching around, and it looks like from that area in Bull County, and it also kind of goes up in the Garrett County. There's 2 names.
Well, let me ask you real quick.
Yeah.
This is not, I mean, it's a decent distance, but it's not far from Monroe County, right?
It's probably maybe 2 hours east.
In that direction? Is it in that direction?
It's actually on the other side of us. Than Monroe County.
So it's,
yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah, go on.
They've called this thing, there's got a couple of names for it, Popelick Monster and the Pigman Monster. And of all things, they're talking about it on a fishing forum.
Same creature?
Same creature. And people's talking about they've heard about it all their life. And different people's calling it different names. So it's kind of got like a folklore.
Right, yeah,
hearing about
definitely.
It. And it goes back to, as you were saying, like back in the 70s, and it's all around Lake Carrington, which is one of those, like, it's a very small lake over there. But it's a man-made lake, kind of like Lake Cumberland,
right,
River
yeah.
Lake. And
we have a lot of those in Kentucky.
Yeah.
We have a lot of man-made lakes in Kentucky. It almost makes you wonder what they were trying to kill out or what they were trying to hide when they made all these man-made lakes.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think Lake Carrington is one of those where there was it's like Burnside. There was a town
and they
flooded it with the lake. So was they maybe trying to kill something?
Is Land Between the Lakes man-made?
Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley is man-made lakes. They're dammed up of the Cumberland and another river. I forgot the other river, but they're both. Yeah.
So where the beast is, the Land Between the Lakes beast, that's a man-made lake.
Yeah, in between 2 of them. It's like 2 man-made lakes, and then Land Between the Lakes is actually a recreation area between the 2.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
When I was reading this, though, 2 things struck me. First of all, this creature sounds like a Mothman without wings.
Yeah.
Like, almost exactly like a Mothman without wings.
Pretty close description of a Mothman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even his head swiveling around like an owl, like, that's pretty tight. And not being able to see in the daylight, that makes a lot of sense. Then at the same time, it also kind of sounds like a chupacabra a little bit. So...
Yeah. And, I mean, maybe they're the same type of animal, possibly.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe there's, like, some that does
have wings.
Yeah.
Which, I was listening again to Seth Breedlove on a podcast the other day, and he was talking about the initial Mothman sighting. And I can't remember any names on this, but they saw him in one of the bunkers, in one of the TNT bunkers. And at that time, he didn't fly at them. He walked toward them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who's to say that the Mothman even had, which, I mean, other reports have shown him wings, but,
Who's to say the wings on this, what they seen here in Monroe County didn't have wings, it just never expanded on.
Exactly. And to further that Mothman theory, which I don't even know if it's a theory, but to further that whole Mothman thing, there's been reports of Mothman, like we talk about in the theme song, there's been reports of Mothman in Asheville, Kentucky. Ashland,
Kentucky. Yeah, right there on the border of West Virginia.
So, the Mothman is not unprecedented to us either. But at the same time, these things digging in graves, which we'll get to this a little bit later, but we have a lot of accounts of dogmen digging up graves.
Yeah.
We actually watched a video just before starting this when we were doing a little preliminary search of, and this is an older video, I think it was 2016, somewhere in there. But, it's of a dogman digging up a grave in Akron, Ohio. And pretty interesting little video. So, and I don't know, kind of like we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, the caves and how we think that maybe the reason, a skeptic would say, which if you guys haven't noticed thus far, I don't think either me nor Steven can clarify as skeptics. But, a skeptic would say, I think, that the reason that we think these things come from caves is because of our whole human history with the underground and with things coming from the underground. But where does that fear come from?
Right.
Maybe there was something in the underground that we were afraid of.
Right, exactly. And I think it goes back to, religion where hell is in the underground.
Right, sure.
But, it's interesting because I think it's in Revelations where it talks about the earth opening up and those, locust-type creatures coming out and stinging man.
And not even that, but I mean, it talks about some pretty incredible things coming from the center of the earth. Yeah. I mean, hell, in Revelation, there's the dragon that rises, which, for all intents and purposes, and if you read into it a little bit, is Cthulhu from H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
So, it makes you wonder why we are so afraid of the underground or why we are so petrified of these types of creatures. But, I think, the whole flesh-eating thing or the whole grave-digging thing, like, I think we have a real fear of as humans of death, obviously. But what will happen to us after we die? What happens to our bodies after we die? Which I suppose a skeptic would say, well, that's the reason we have all these monsters that want to feast upon dead flesh. But there are a lot of accounts from a lot of different people in the modern day and the past of different creatures who feast on the flesh of the dead and actively dig up cemeteries to do so.
Right.
And maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's something far stranger than eating the flesh of the dead. Maybe they're doing something with their, I don't know, spiritual work or something.
Yeah. And going back on the lake thing, a lot of the lakes, when they flooded the lakes, a lot of the cemeteries didn't get moved.
Right.
And there's a lot of cemeteries under the lakes. I hadn't
thought about that.
And some, even in Burnside, I think, some of them floated to the surface.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a very good point. But definitely an odd. The Gravedigger is one of the oddest of the Kentucky cryptids, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
By description and by action alone. But that brings us up, the Kentucky Gravedigger brings up a really interesting story that Stephen and I actually had just started talking about this morning, kind of rolls into this. I think its name is, Steve, you did a little bit more research into this than I did. It's the Mammoth Cave Ghoul, is that?
Yeah, the Mammoth Cave Ghoul.
Tell us a little bit about that.
And what the Mammoth Cave Ghoul is, it seems to be, and there seems to be like a couple different reportings on it.
For anybody listening outside of Kentucky, the Mammoth Cave is the largest cave system in the world.
I think it is the largest, yeah.
Yeah, well, and like we mentioned in the theme song, largest cave system in the world, branches out all the way up Appalachia, all throughout the state of Kentucky.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, serves up a lot of weird shit. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, and kind of what's based upon, there's a couple of sources I had here. One was a Reddit post that this person posted a story about it. And another one is out of a book about scary stories of Mammoth Cave.
Yeah.
The scary stories of Mammoth Cave, kind of to give just a quick summary of it.
Yeah, because it looks like a really great book.
Yeah,
I haven't got the chance to read it. But
there's lots of stories, just, because Mammoth Cave, a little history on it. They used to have a hospital in it.
Right.
They used to think it had healing properties for tuberculosis.
A lot of people's been lost down there.
Yeah, a lot of people have been lost. And one thing is, like, when they would have, like, I guess they were miners or explorers in the cave, and they would see eyes,
Yeah.
And they would see these ghouls, or devils, what they would call them.
Interesting.
In the cave.
Kind of goes back to the whole...
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing of it is like, some of them, would see it, and then they would sometimes call them ghosts.
Right.
But there's numerous reportings of this, from the early, late 1800s, early 1900s. And until we've modernized the cave system into the national park of what it is. Now, those signs have kind of went down. But there's one thing I've kind of, read about this morning was this guy, he's talking about the subterranean passageways and kind of exploring it. And whatever it is, he was talking about, I guess it happened around, 1909. Mm-hmm. And he says the creature was named the cave-dwelling ghoul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is in Mammoth Cave.
This is in Mammoth Cave. Okay. And he says that it would take pleasure in capturing, like, young girls that would go in and drag them into the cave.
Right.
And then he would feast upon them, and then he'd also, like, make them eat parts of their body until they choked and died, and then he would kill them and leave their bodies. He would eat their bodies and then just kind of leave their remains.
And this is the ghoul, right?
This is the ghoul,
right.
Yeah. And, and the kind of the thing about this is there's not a lot of reports, but this was back, late 1800s, early 1800s. Yeah. Not a lot of missing people, but there's a lot of deaths and stuff that happen in the cave.
Sure.
And Mammoth Cave, spans on, 100, miles all over Kentucky.
All over Kentucky, up toward the Appalachian Mountains.
And actually, the thing about it is that they don't realize how far it goes.
Yeah, it's
they're still finding parts of it.
Right.
If you remember back when the Corvette Museum had the sinkhole part, that was kind of part of the cave system. So that's
part of the Mammoth Cave system?
Yeah, because the cave system, the national park is, pretty large, but it doesn't run over towards Bowling Green.
Right.
But, like, over in the Bowling Green area, and as you get over in western Kentucky, there's still, like, deep underground cave parts to it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it'd be passable by human, like a full-grown man, but, creatures or whatever could probably...
Sure. Especially if you're extra-dimensional.
Do that.
Moving through portals and shit.
But, it's definitely interesting that, there has been, like, several reports of these ghouls in the Mammoth Cave.
Sure.
Of people seeing them and seeing the eyes. Like I said earlier, back in, the early days of when they first, settlers happened over, started exploring the cave, they would call them, devils.
Right.
But another interesting thing of it is like some people would report like pale humanoid type person in the cave.
Yeah.
And the explanation for that was it was patients that had escaped, I guess, the ward or whatever they had in there. And they would get lost in the cave, and then when people would explore the cave, they would come after them and bite them and try to eat them, kind of like a zombie type thing.
Right.
Which goes back to to this
almost like they had went feral, feral humans.
Yeah. So, or could it be that's just the explanation they tried to tell themselves, and it was like a group of these ghouls that lived in the cave system.
Or were these people being possessed by something that lived deep in the cave?
Right.
Because, there is a lot of cave-dwelling creatures, not only in Kentucky. The Bell Witch in Tennessee, she's said to inhabit a cave, or the spirit of whatever the Bell Witch actually is, which that whole story is pretty crazy. But that spirit is said to inhabit that cave. And, there's the goblins here who also inhabit the cave, which we'll get onto in a little bit. Could the goblins and the ghouls be the same thing? They don't seem to share that same aggression.
Right. Yeah, and it appears whatever is in the cave system, hasn't, like the over in Monroe County, that was in the 70s.
Right.
This is, I think the last time was like 1909.
Right. It's been a while.
It's been a long time since something like this has been cited, but still, there's still like historical reports. And again, I kind of like go back to Native American history. I wonder if there's any documentation or any stories. I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there is.
Because they, explore the cave and they use the cave system until the settlers come over and kind of run them off.
Right.
So there's definitely, to me, there definitely seems like something was in the cave because there's too many stories.
Right.
And,
And, not only that, but the caves themselves, they're so, we've got these stories of ghouls and of goblins and of something, like there's almost too much to these caves, and there's almost too many stories of something going on in these caves for there not to be anything there.
Exactly.
Like it has to be something, even if it's something that we can explain. It's odd that there are this many stories of all of these creatures in these caves.
Right. And, I don't know how many, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been to Mammoth Cave.
Sure.
And explored it. I mean, you can take different tours of it, guided tour, or self-guided tour. But, you can go in there for a day and not see all of it, of course.
Right.
But you have to be, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong on this, but there are certain levels that they have. And I think to go into the harder levels, you have to kind of be like...
You have to sign the waiver.
Yeah.
For sure. Because I had actually wanted to do this. You have to sign the waiver, and then you have to have a certain level of training, too, don't you?
Yeah.
Or they train you there or something.
Yeah, I think because it's dangerous,
of
course.
Yeah.
And there's tight crevices that you got to fit through and work your way through. But you go miles underground.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and we haven't gotten to this, but of course we're going to later on in the season. When we were talking about show ideas for this season, we had mentioned a lot of branching off into true crime and maybe some just strange happenings that have happened around Kentucky that maybe weren't supernatural or paranormal. But when we brought up some of those topics, which we'll get to eventually for those of you listening for sure, but when we brought up those topics, one of the topics we brought up was the Floyd Collins thing, who was a noted cave explorer who knew the cave systems well and got back in there and got stuck.
Right.
And of course, at the time, there was nothing that could have got him out. He got stuck back there, There's a lot of happenings like that in Mammoth Cave where people either get stuck, something happens. It's weird, though, how you don't hear about more stuff going on in Mammoth Cave. You would think there would be more people who disappear, who go disappearing, who...
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to maybe after the Floyd Collins incident, maybe that's when they decided to be like, hey, we need to regulate who can go in here or not. Because it's not like a national park like, let's say... like Yellowstone or Smoky Mountains.
Right.
That you can just go explore on your own.
Right.
They have areas restricted where you can't get into unless you do the tour.
Which is still interesting that they would restrict it like that and it's still being a national park. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying they have anything to hide, but it is interesting that parts of it are restricted without,
Right.
I don't know. Interesting, though. But anything else on the...
No, that's it. Yeah. There ain't much out there about it other than, there's a couple sources, but it's still one of those... folklore cryptid monsters that's discussed that people,
and it's another example of there being something in the cave or in the caves of Kentucky, which is a recurring theme throughout almost all of these stories.
Right.
But our next story actually brings us to Breckenridge, Kentucky. What were we talking about Breckenridge a few minutes ago?
That was a werewolf.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is odd because this one is the Lizard Man. Stephensport, Kentucky. This happened in 1966. So this happened in early fall of 1966 in Breckenridge. Stephensport, Kentucky was the city. It happened approximately around 1 a.m. in the morning. this report wasn't submitted until September 13th, 2006, by a man named Joseph. His last name is left out in the report. Go ahead and read this little encounter. It's pretty short here. So, the initial encounter, Joseph says, when I was around 9, let me say real quick though, that this report comes from a site called KentuckyBigfoot.com. This is an awesome site. I think Steven actually turned me onto it originally, with the Gravedigger sighting. But this site has everything. It's got encounters. It's literally got a list of counties that you can click on and read about the encounters, which is weird, which we'll get into here in a minute. I clicked on Russell County to read some stuff, and it took me to Shelbyville. I don't know why, but
interesting.
But so yeah, this encounter comes from KentuckyBigfoot.com. Great website. I should probably do some research into who's running it and tell you guys. But whoever's running it does an awesome job. We'd love to talk to you if you're down to sit down for an interview. I'm sure you got a lot that you can talk about Kentucky and cryptids and all of that with us. So anyway, this is a report about the lizard man. Again, it was reported by Joseph on September 13th, 2006, but the actual date that it occurred was in early fall in 1966. So his encounter... When I was around 9 years old, living in Breckinridge County, I had one of the most hair-raising experiences of my life. One night, while fast asleep in my bed, I woke to a loud commotion outside my bedroom window, as if something hit the side of my house. I sprang to the window and looked out, but saw nothing. So I ran to the living room and pulled back the curtains to the window of the front door and came face to face with the most strange creature. I can only describe it as a lizard man, although the only human thing about it was the fact that it stood on 2 legs and was about 5'6" to 6 feet tall. As you can imagine, we really startled each other. It quickly turned and ran for the creek next to my house, and I jumped back from the window. I then ran to an adjacent window to catch a glimpse of it as it ran away on 2 legs toward the creek, which was about 75 yards from my house. I lost sight of it as it disappeared in the darkness. Of the lizard man's description, Joseph says this: it was very amphibious looking, with scales covering its entire body. I could definitely see that this creature had webbed feet and webbed hands. Its color was a dark brownish green. What I remember the most about its face were these huge rows of gills, which flared on both sides of its face. The face was very hard looking, with dark little eyes similar to a snake or lizard. I can't recall a nose or lips, as the face-to-face encounter only lasted a second or two. There was this ridge-like feature which started on the forehead and ran back over the top of its head, kind of peaked at the top. In other information, he says, our house is located on an acre where Sinking Creek meets the Ohio River. Sinking Creek originates 15 miles upstream in Big Springs, Kentucky. An interesting fact, this creek is the only natural trout spring-fed creek in Kentucky. Just past the town of Sample. Heard of Sample, Kentucky?
I've never heard of Sample, Kentucky, no.
Just past the town of Sample, it disappears 12 miles underground. Back to the caves.
Yeah, cave system.
Thus the name Sinking Creek, and then resurfaces in an area further upstream in an explosion of bubbling water. As far as I'm aware, nobody has ever dared to dive far enough down to determine its true origin. This creek is believed to be connected to the vast underwater system which connects many caverns of western Kentucky, most noted being the caverns of Mammoth Cave.
Very interesting.
Follow-up. Witness appears to be very credible. He is now 49 years old, married with 2 children in college. The details of his encounter remain true to his online report. He kept stressing how amphibious-looking the creature was, and it definitely ran on 2 feet. He added that its body was proportionate to a man's, but neither muscles nor genitalia were noticed. What struck him the most was how quick it was. To this day, he still can't ever imagine someone having a costume that lifelike. Not today, not 40 years ago, especially in the remote parts of Breckinridge, Kentucky.
Very interesting. And I did a quick look with Stevens Port of that because I was interested.
Yeah.
It's right on the Ohio River. Right across the Ohio River is Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
The Hoosier National Forest is like straight across the river. And if you start looking into that,
oh yeah,
there is all kinds of folklore monsters and creatures.
Really?
And evil stuff within the National Forest. Though.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
So again, we tie back into the national
forest.
National
Not only
parkland.
that, but we tie back into running water.
Yeah.
Which was a theme
Mammoth
from...
Cave.
Yep. We tie back into the cave systems.
Yeah.
Not only that, but we tie back into the Mammoth Cave system.
Exactly. It all ties in. And maybe, you and I was talking prior,
Right.
to start the podcast here, and maybe the cave system is the way these creatures
Sure.
move around into these different parks and different areas of
Right.
the, of the region.
It's the bloodline. It's the bloodline that delivers these creatures to wherever they're going.
Yeah.
But not only that, I mean, the lizard man, there's so much to this case. First of all, I mean, hell, let's go ahead and say it, reptilian aliens. I mean, we keep getting reports of all these reptilian-looking aliens. And I mean, of course, the most notable is, what is his name? The big conspiracy theorist, David Icke,
Right.
who really pushes that whole reptilian conspiracy, which it's weird. Some parts of that are very convincing. Other parts of that are like crack smoking conclusions. But, and the thing is that, you would think that this lizard man would be a one-off creature, that this would be the last time this lizard man would ever be reported. But as I'm sure a lot of our listeners who are interested in cryptozoology know, this is far from the last time that this creature was reported. Of course, probably the most famous creature is in 1972 when, in March of that year, 2 Ohio policemen saw what has become known as the Loveland Frogman in Loveland, Ohio. This was investigated by Ron Schaefer and Richard Mackley. These researchers interviewed the officers involved but have not published their names. The first incident took place at 1 a.m., March 3rd, 1972. Officer Williams was en route to Loveland via Riverside when he thought he saw a dog by the side of the road, but when that thing stood up, its eyes illuminated the car lights, looked at him for an instant, turned, and leapt over the guardrail. And then the other officer sees it, of course. They made fun of this guy for a long time at the office, and then on March 17th, they had made fun of Officer Williams for a while because he had saw this frogman,
Right.
but then on March 17th, 72, Officer Johnson was driving outside of the Loveland when he had a similar experience. An animal was laying in the middle of the road. He stopped to remove what he thought was a dead animal. Instead, the creature jumps up and hobbles over the guardrail. It's described as frog or lizard-like creature. So this is in Loveland, Ohio, which is a good distance, right? I mean, that's a decent way from Kentucky.
Yeah, that's above Cincinnati.
That's what I was thinking. It's a decent ways, but still, it's interesting that that these things were seen here, and then almost an identical creature was seen there. And of course, alien abductees report reptilian aliens all the time that look almost exactly the way that this thing is described.
Exactly.
But really, what caught my eye with this case, and like we were talking about, and this kind of goes into that whole thing of there are all of these vintage sightings that are crazy that for some reason have exited our memory or probably will never be reported again or whatever. But in the report on Bigfoot, on KentuckyBigfoot.com, in the related sightings tab, it says, and this was written, I'm not exactly sure who this was written by, but I'll include it in the show notes for sure. It says, over 20 years ago, by digging into back issues of the Louisville, Kentucky Courier Journal, I discovered one of those gems that has kept me pondering its meaning for decades. The interesting title item was in the October 24th, 1878 issue. A wild man of the woods was captured, supposedly in Tennessee, and then placed on exhibit in Louisville. The creature was described as being 6 feet, 5 inches tall, and having eyes twice the size of normal. His body was covered with scales. The article now makes sense to me. So, and then it says again, almost 100 years later, again, in Louisville, there were more stories of reptilian entities. In October 1975, near Milton, Kentucky, Clarence Cable reported a giant lizard was roaming the forest near his junkyard. So there we go back to the whole forest. Yeah. Author Peter Gultilia described the creature. Cable described as about 15 foot, had a long forked tongue, and big eyes that bulged something like a frog's. It was a dull white and black, and white stripes across its body, and quarter-sized speckles all over it. On-site field investigators by Mark A. Hall, however, indicated this giant lizard ran bipedally. According to other witnesses, according to other Trimble County, Kentucky witnesses. The Ohio River is Louisville's, Milton's, and Trimble County's northern border. There's that. And here we go, Evansville, Indiana. On August 21st, 1955, near Evansville, Indiana, Mrs. Darwin Johnson was almost pulled forever into the depths of the Ohio River. In what seems to be a very close meeting with one of these creatures, Miss Johnson of Godtown, Indiana, was swimming with her friends, Miss Chris Lamble, about 15 feet from the shore when suddenly something grabbed her from under the surface. It felt like a hand, had huge claws and furry, or scaly, palms. It came up from behind, grabbed her leg, grabbed her knee, and pulled her under. She kicked and fought herself free. Although both women could not see the thing, they were screaming and yelling to scare it away. Finally, Miss Johnson lunged for Miss Lamble's inner tube, and a loud thump apparently scared it away, and it released its grip. Back on shore, Miss Johnson received treatment for her scratches and marks on her leg. 14 investigator Terry Coughlin passed on the information that Miss Johnson had a palm print-shaped green stain below her knee that cannot be removed, and it remained for several days. Interestingly, Colvin learned the Johnsons were visited by an individual who identified himself as an Air Force colonel who took voluminous notes and warned them not to talk further about the incident. Of course, this sounds so similar to the Man in Black encounter that it goes without saying.
That does sound like the Men in Black.
Very much so. But, you ready for this? August 21st, 1955. Name me anything else that happened on that day?
I know exactly what happened. Yeah,
the Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Yep. The Hopkinsville encounter with the Goblins.
Yeah.
The same day, dude.
That's messed up. How many coincidences?
How many coincidences are too many? We're going to find a way to sneak that in every
yeah.
episode.
Yeah, we are.
But yeah, so apparently, in addition to dogmen and goblins, we also have a decent lizard man problem as well.
That sounds pretty major. And we share it with Ohio and Indiana. Along that river.
Almost exactly where you were talking about, right? Evansville, Indiana? Is that?
Yeah, right there at the Hoosier National Forest. And a lot of people was talking about, having encounters with that in that area with a similar creature.
The lizard man?
Yeah, up in the Hoosier National Forest. Because it's, right across the border from Stephensport.
Interesting. It makes you wonder, if there really are all these different races of creatures running around, or if they can shapeshift somehow into like dogmen or lizard men or goblins or whatever,
Right.
That's interesting. What did you find out about the other encounters that they had with it? Anything?
Yeah, let me bring that up here, what I found here. Again, this is on a Reddit post.
Right.
And this person encountered the creature, and they said it was a tall corpse, pale, skeletal skin stretched over their bones type creatures. It hunched on all fours, limbs were long, it didn't have many joints. It had gaping holes on its face, gills.
Yeah, the gills for sure.
A grin of black razors, and then it said, like it trying to grab them, they run off. And that's kind of like theirs. But,
and it's so weird that these creatures show aggression because, for a lot of researchers, we talk about like the trickster nature, not so much like the hostile nature of these things. You know what I mean? It's interesting. It's interesting that they're aggressive.
And it's always kind of interesting to see how these encounters kind of tie together, and they always happen kind of in the same similar areas.
Oh, yeah.
Around water, or in the national park somewhere, or national forest.
Secluded.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, a lot of skeptics will say, well, why don't they just show up right in the middle of cities if they're that prevalent? But there is definitely something about this phenomenon, about all of these things, UFOs, ghosts, all of this, that it does. First of all, it doesn't like to be seen at all. Like, it doesn't like to be seen on a mass level. Right. Unless it does, in which case there's some that, have showed up in cities. Right. Phoenix Lights, the Hellier incident, like we were talking about before. But they don't like to be seen on a mass level, and they don't like populated areas.
Right.
And they don't really like photos of them being taken. We've seen several incidents where they've just stopped photo. Well, hell, you had an incident happen with you in
with Octavia Hatcher, where we took a picture of her grave and my iPhone locked up, and half the picture is like distorted.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we do an episode on it,
Well, we actually included it in the show notes.
We did, last season. Yeah. So,
but I think a lot of the reason that these things happen in the places that they do is because the phenomena itself chooses where it happens.
Right.
And to go back to the fairy thing, I mean, fairies didn't come into the kingdoms. Fairies didn't come into they were in the forests. They were in the secluded areas. To go back to the whole, maybe we're offering these areas as places for these things to stay.
Yeah, sanctuary.
Yeah, but they're not staying there.
No, not anymore.
Right.
Another crazy thing I kind of just run across as we were sitting there talking. I don't know if you've ever heard of this about the Popelick Monster.
Yes.
Or the Goat Man.
Yes, let's talk about him. I hadn't had him in my notes. Me and Jamie, this is one of Jamie's favorite cryptids.
Yeah, this is the first time I actually heard of him, but it's up around Louisville in the Fisherville neighborhood. It's under train tracks. Like the Goat Man was up there.
Yeah. And he also, his description almost makes him look like Baphomet.
Yeah.
It almost makes him look like that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and some of the urban legends, and this is off Wikipedia, and then I'm going to flip over to an article and read a little bit off of it, but this is a human, they say it's a human-goat hybrid.
Right.
That was a circus freak who vowed revenge after being mistreated by the people. You know how, I guess in the circus days where they'd had the freaks, they'd throw popcorn, almost kind of like with the Louisville creature. They had them, and this is the same area.
Yeah.
So, with this, and actually this is out of the Washington Post. And this
I hope you're going where I think you're going.
This is from 2016, where the couple got killed looking for it.
Yes, there's actually been a lot of deaths looking for this guy.
Yeah, and they fell off the train bridge, to my understanding.
Several deaths.
Yeah, and they go into, like, the history of it. And it's known as the Goat Man, the Sheep Man, or the Popelick Monster. And again, all these creatures have different names. Like we were talking earlier, they're referred to different things, but they all seem to have, the same theme to them.
Right. Oddly enough, Ron Murphy and I, speaking about fairies, because Ron Murphy's a big fairy guy, when I met him at CryptiCon, this was their conversation. We talked about the Popelick Monster.
Really?
Because I told him, I said, I told him about our podcast, I told him what we did, and I definitely want to try and get Ron on here, because he's a really smart dude, and he knows a lot about the whole fairy-alien connection. And I follow him on Facebook, and he's always posting cool stuff. But our first conversation was about the Popelick Monster, and and how... I've got some interesting theories, but go on.
Yeah. And it kind of, talks about and it says it confines itself to the woods of Louisville, which again, that kind of goes back to what we just said a few minutes ago.
Yep.
The monster's origin stories are varied. And actually, this is kind of interesting. It says, to hear the Sierra Club tell it, the Popelick Monster was exhibited as a circus freak. And the Sierra Club telling the story is interesting.
The Sierra Club.
Yeah.
Now they're the...
Like the environmental stuff.
Yeah.
To my understanding, they are. I could be wrong. I want to fact check that. But again, he was they're saying he's a circus freak.
Yeah.
Which is, and that he escaped captivity when lightning struck the circus train.
Yeah.
And he was the lone survivor. But then, another one is that, David Domain, I guess, I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
Described him as a creature of something born out of a deal with the devil.
Yep.
That the Goat Man arose as a tale of a local farmer back in the day. He tortured a herd of goats for Satan and signed a contract with him, and then he forfeited his soul. And he got turned into the Goat Man.
Monster.
Yeah.
Now,
so,
go ahead, sorry.
So what do you think? What's your theories on this?
Well, oddly enough, after I had this conversation with Ron Murphy at CryptiCon, me and Jamie were on the way home, and I told Jamie that I didn't believe in this at all. I thought it was all bullshit. But we started doing some investigation because Jamie loves this. Like, it's all her thing because she's really into Waverly Hills and all that. And that's all in Louisville as well. Yeah. So we started doing a little research, and there's actually a lot of different goat men around the country. There's lots of reports of goat men. But one of the most interesting things, and I wish I had done a little more research into this. There's a goat man up north, either in Wisconsin or Minnesota or somewhere like that. And it's believed, and this is only by a fraction of the researchers who have done research on him, that this goat man may have been the son of that goat man, who, when this circus train went through, they got this goat man, and then they were bringing him through Louisville, and that's when, if I'm remembering the details of this, it's been a little bit, it's been at least since CryptidCon that I've done a little research on this, but that's not my theory on the goat man. Here's my theory on the goat man. Yes, I do think the goat man exists now, because, or let me rephrase that, if he exists now, this is the reason I think he exists now. There have been at least a handful of people that have went researching or went looking for him and have died, right?
Right.
So if you look into the formation of tulpas, or you look into the formation of thought forms, or if you look into the summoning of any type of creature, and this is bordering a little into esotericism and occulture and dark magic, but a blood sacrifice, along with a constant commitment of focus upon this creature, especially a blood sacrifice by the people who believed in this creature.
Right.
Dude, that's some powerful shit.
That is.
That's some powerful, powerful magic you're fucking with. And not only that, but imagine all these people go to this place to find this monster and then unknowingly, maybe knowingly, sacrifice themselves to do so. I think if the Popelick Monster is real, which there's evidence he could be, there's evidence he may not be, I think he's some type of thought form that people have went with the intention of finding and have, you know, very, very really, very literally committed a blood sacrifice to raise this creature.
It summons them.
Exactly. And even if he didn't exist before, this whole idea of this thing being there, and, you know, and I can't explain that, like I can't explain this stuff, but, you know, the phenomena of tulpas and of creating things by intense focus. And, you know, just even, you read black magic stuff, a blood sacrifice is a very, very powerful thing. So, I mean, you combine those two things, and I think he has been summoned from somewhere, basically. But then again, I don't know, I really like the story, you know, of him being the son of this other famous goat man, and them picking him up on the train and bringing him down here and him escaping. Could be both things. Who knows? Who knows? You know?
But it's very interesting that people, you know, several people have died trying to. That's,
yeah. At least, like 6 or 7 people have died or fallen off this train track or been hit by trains. Or there's a warning at the train depot not to.
Yeah, and the police are saying, you know, they'll charge you with trespassing if you try. Yeah. But here's the interesting thing is a lot of the people who go to Waverly Hills, you know, come to Louisville, that's one of the side things they'll go try to do.
Yeah, for the Popelick Monster.
Yeah. So I actually, that's the first I've heard of him tonight. So
it's interesting. I hadn't done a lot of research into him. There's actually a Mysterious Universe article about him, which I'll include in the show notes and maybe share on the Facebook. He's definitely an interesting little creature, but it really reminds me, you know, we get all these stories of, and I'm not saying that any of these stories are fake or any of these stories are not real, but how many stories do we hear of, like, the bridges where there will be a ghost on one end? And hell, there's one right up here on the Parkway.
Right, Fishing Creek Bridge,
And I'm not so sure if those are incidents that have incited that. Like, you know, like someone's died there or whatever, which I'm not even sure if a ghost or a spirit of the dead anyway, but that's a whole different discussion. But I'm not really sure if there are inciting incidents that have caused these paranormal things to happen, or if we have concentrated on them so much and we have believed in them so much that we have brought them about ourselves. And dude, I feel like, you know, human consciousness is a supernatural entity all its own.
Right.
Like, we do some weird shit with consciousness, so why couldn't we manifest these things? Why couldn't we, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying all supernatural creatures are that, but in these instances, I think they very well could be. Because we've focused so much, and so many people have talked about these things, that we've literally manifested them.
And they stay alive by people like us talking about them.
Exactly. Yeah. By podcasts like this one.
Yeah.
Sitting in a room talking about, you know.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I guess that kind of goes into the whole American Gods idea of we bring our gods to life through worship and through prayer or whatever. But I've always kind of been intrigued by that idea anyway, so. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the Popelick Monster. I was gonna bring him up, and then I was like, we'll save him for it. But I'm glad that we,
I just happened to stumble upon him here.
He's an interesting little fellow, and he's, like most of this stuff, the more you dig into him, the more you're like, there's definitely some weird stuff going on here, but you can't pinpoint what the weird shit is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And the circus freak thing ties in, to the reptile man.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting that they both come out of Louisville. Was Louisville, it has some freaky stuff with Waverly Hills and...
Louisville does have some freaky... Like, Louisville is by far one of... Well, I mean, hell, to quote the Hunter S. Thompson quote that we used for our promotion, for the next few days, we're going to be in Louisville, Kentucky, and, weird shit happens here, or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember the full quote, but, it's not LA, it's not New York. There's very weird shit, very real weird shit that happens here, or whatever, so... But I'm glad that we got to talk about him. It makes me happy. But kind of to tie into that, another furry creature, and I'd like to say really quickly, there is a lot of Sasquatch sightings in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, a tremendous number of Sasquatch sightings. Don't really think we'll talk about those here, simply because this is more of a one-off in strange creatures, and the Sasquatches are pretty common.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not common, but they're a common, speaking of, interestingly enough, and I will mention this briefly, here where Stephen and I live in Russell County, Kentucky, in Windsor, in the Dunville community, just down the road from us, there was a sign up for a long time that said, "Caution, Sasquatch crossing," or Bigfoot crossing.
Yeah, Bigfoot crossing, yeah.
Oddly enough, when I was doing some research today, and I couldn't find the case itself, but I found like the statistic for it, there has been one Bigfoot report in Russell County, Kentucky.
Really?
Yeah. So I assume that that's where that sign came from.
That's interesting. So is this right up the road from you all? Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting.
Very cool. I always wondered about that sign.
Right?
That's off of 910 there. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Kentucky Bigfoot is how I stumbled upon that one sighting as well. So, but speaking of Kentucky Bigfoot, speaking of the Sasquatches, we're not really going to spend a lot of time on the Sasquatches, but, for the fourth or fifth time this evening, I would like to bring up that Kentucky has a major werewolf problem, or dogman problem, or whatever these things are.
And now that is one, in my research, that is one creature that seems to have a reoccurring theme from the far west to the far east.
And he keeps popping up.
Yeah.
Like he's something that keeps showing up.
Everywhere. And even in the Monroe County. That's kind of hinted at what possibly did that.
Right, exactly. And not only that, but, for all of these crazy sightings, like, I honestly feel like we have more of a dogman presence than we do a Sasquatch presence in Kentucky.
Absolutely.
But we hear way more about the Sasquatch than we do about the dogman. Why is that? You know what I mean?
I think the Sasquatch is more of like Bigfoot is more of a common thing. I mean, they made a sign. A sign's kind of like something you pick up. So I mean, it's you had the Harry and the Hendersons. Right. You didn't have, the Dogman and the Hendersons.
That's a good point. But I don't know, man. The more I read about the Sasquatches and about them ripping people's arms off and shit, the more the Harry and the Hendersons image does not line up with a Sasquatch. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, they're not these gentle giant creatures that are roaming through our woods. They'll fucking eat you if you give them the chance.
Right. And to think about the werewolf signs, I mean, those are even found, people have, just in my research, it's all the way, even over in Adair County in Marrowbone.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, kind of, I think, southern Adair County. And even over in, far eastern Kentucky.
Very much so.
Pikeville. I mean, everywhere seems to have that.
Yeah, the werewolves are everywhere. And, let's get into a little bit of the werewolf lore. Especially this werewolf, and let me do a real quick disclaimer and say that when we use the word werewolves, we're not necessarily it's like when we use the word demons for extra-dimensional entities. Not necessarily saying that these creatures are human beings that transform into wolves under the full moon, but the closest thing that we have to compare these creatures to are fictionalized werewolves. Just like when we talk about demons and extra-dimensional creatures, the closest that we have to compare these creatures to are demons. So it's not necessarily, we think that these are, lycanthropy werewolves, so much as this is the closest thing that we have to compare these creatures to. Dogmen is another word that's frequently used for them, but I like werewolf. Makes it sound cool.
Yeah, it does.
But talking about these werewolves, let's talk about the Waddy Werewolf in Waddy, Kentucky. Have you ever heard about?
I've never heard of Waddy, Kentucky. Yeah.
So as far as I know, it's up Shelby County.
Okay.
Does that sound right? Shelby.
And actually, you know what? Shelbyville, Shelby County. Yeah, that's some of the things that I've seen. In my research. So yeah, so that's.
So this Waddy Werewolf.
Community of farmers in Shelby County has been terrorized over the past few weeks by a mystery animal. The creature has been attacking but not eating livestock such as goats and calves. LEX 18's Adam Weiner reports.
This here is Polka Dot. She's missing an ear and almost lost them both, but her attacker is a bit of a mystery.
I heard the goat and my dog's going off, and I ran out there and I looked out and I saw the goat laying on the ground.
It's the second time Kevin Cox's livestock have been attacked recently.
Noticed my Holstein bull looked funny, a little different, and it was covered in blood. Then I had my other two bulls come up, and they had the ears all chewed up.
Cox is one of a handful of farmers along Ditto Road in Waddy whose animals have been mysteriously attacked. Another farmer had to put down 5 goats because the injuries were so severe. Most of the attacks have come at night. One woman told county officials she and her daughter were briefly followed by an animal that made a sound she called indescribable. County officials are investigating, and they've recruited the help of the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Department. They're out here today searching these woods and setting traps, looking for whatever it is may be out there. Meanwhile, Kevin Cox is doing all he can to protect his property.
I don't know what it is, It'll cure my curiosity of what it is, too.
Covering the news in Shelby County, Adam Weiner, LEX 18 News.
Shelby County officials are hosting a meeting at the Waddy Werewolf Club on Kings Highway on Monday. They want to make the public aware of the problem and discuss possible solutions.
This is a blog. It's called Strange is Normal. It's by a fellow Philip Spencer. This was published on Tuesday, January 8th, 2003. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and read this full article. It's not a long read, and I think as I go through it, our listeners will definitely hear some similarities from some other cases that we've talked about recently. Philip Spencer on his blog says this, and I will include this in the show notes. And like I've mentioned throughout, any of these people that we're talking about on this episode, if you hear your work on here, thank you in advance for letting us use it. Secondly, we'd love to talk to you about it. If you're interested in that, get with us on the email, get with us on Facebook, get with us on Twitter. We'd love to talk about some of this research you've done. So, anyway, the Waddy Werewolf. What is the real story? Within the week of November 28th and December 5th and 6th of 2012, something evil came calling on Ditto Road in central Kentucky. Central Kentucky is east of Louisville, Kentucky, and near the small town of Waddy, Kentucky. So what happened on the Ditto Road that changed people forever in the area? Well, the story that was put out to the public and the story from people who were witnesses have some differences. The damage to the animals seems to be consistent from all involved: faces ripped off goats, their tongues torn out, ears ripped off goats, and calves. When I first heard of this story, I went to the website below of WDRB TV. I'll include that link in the show notes. I read the story and looked at the picture of the animal track, and it seemed to me that this was a canine track due to the specifics of the physical nature of the track. By having this picture attached to the story, one would logically assume that this was the track of the animal that did the horrible acts to the animals on Ditto Road. I made some calls to WDRB TV, and although very nice to speak with the promises to have the reporters covering the story contact me, it never happened. I then contacted a resident of Ditto Road who was a witness to the aftermath of these terrible events, and some specifics of the story were much different than what the public was being told. First, let's discuss the picture attached to the story on WDRB's website. According to the person I was in communication with, who asked to remain anonymous, the picture on the website was not the track of the creature who did the damage. It was a picture of his daughter's dog, a farm dog. The actual tracks of what he thought might have attacked all the animals was much bigger. He had measured the tracks, and the tracks were over 5 inches long, 5 inches to 3/8 inches long, and over 4 1/2 inches wide. For those of us who know tracks and have studied tracks, this is a huge track for something that appears to be a canine. Oddly, this was never told or mentioned in any of the stories about the events. To learn about the tracks, please visit this website, and you will soon see there is no dog that leaves a track this big. I'll also include that link in the show notes. A reporter took pictures of the large tracks, yet they were never published anywhere I can find. The witness said it was very confusing to him that they would put his daughter's dog track with the stories, but not only not show the large track, but never mention them. He also mentioned he found it very odd no one laid something by the tracks to give a perspective of the actual size of the track. My question is, why was this done? Why not tell the residents of the area that something very big was in the area, and why imply that a small track picture that it was the attacker's track? It was reported that a woman and her daughter were walking to their house in the dark during this time period when suddenly they heard something which was coming up behind them and making a very strange sound. The two ran to their barn and closed the door and waited until their husband came home. According to the husband, his wife and daughter stated that whatever was that made the sound, they had never heard it before. They went online and searched for animal sounds in Kentucky and said that although it was not actually the sound they heard, what they found was close. What they found was the sound of foxes fighting. When the woman and daughter went into the garage to get away from the creature, the husband told me the creature left and went down the road to a relative's home, where he heard the sound also. The creature was referred to in reports as the Waddy Werewolf. I assume that this was a name that had been tagged to this creature on Ditto Road that did the December 2012 attacks. But it turns out the Waddy Werewolf has been mentioned in this area for many years. Although I tried to get information on what had occurred in the past to bring this name into the lore of the land on Ditto Road, no one could tell me an answer other than maybe it was just something made to scare up kids. Reports of large dark creatures were reported in the area of the attacks. From the published information, there were more than one report of this, and oddly just a few weeks before the story of the animal attacks went public, a man contacted me through email and told me a story that had just happened to him where he saw a large, upright, dark creature walking up the lane to his property at dusk, which is very near the land where the attacks happened. The viciousness of these attacks is what could be described as pure evil. The animals were so horribly damaged that they had to be put down. Some survived, but most did not. There was no evidence of the animals being eaten, and strangely, there was no damage below the heads. Town meetings were held, and people were told over and over that it was a dog or dogs that has done these evil deeds upon the helpless animals. I will say, if the tracks that were seen and measured over 5 inches long were not the creature who wreaked this carnage, it was not a dog. Some of the animals who were savaged were locked in pens, yet there were no tracks or any sign of anything breaking in or tearing its way into the pens. Numerous individuals walked the pens checking for signs of entrance, but nothing was found. So let's look at the information we have so far and some new information that has not been told to the public. The only canine to leave a track that is over 5 inches long is, well, none. The closest canine to make a track this large is a wolf, and a man who lives on Ditto Road raises wolves. A reporter photojournalist took pictures of the large track, but they never reported to the public and never mentioned in any stories about this event. Many dogs that live on Ditto Road are now gone since this event. 6 that my sources told me, and possibly more. Still today, 1/8/2013, an article in the Anderson News of Lawrenceburg, Kentucky lays blame on a dog or pack of dogs. Remember that the animals who were attacked in pens secured pens, and after multiple examinations, the pens had not been damaged in any way. The gates were secure, and the fences were approximately 5 foot in height, according to my source. Can you imagine what a pack of dogs would have to do to get into this type of enclosure? There would be signs of damage, you can bet on that. My opinion is to keep laying blame on the dogs is wrong. Why hasn't the man who owns and raises wolves on Ditto Road not been investigated? There is no mention in any article concerning the story of this person owning wolves on Ditto Road. Why not the most obvious place to check is where the wolves are? Did a wolf do all that damage? I'm not sure. I rather doubt it, and neither is anyone else certain. But there are numerous questions that need to be answered concerning the horror that happened to these helpless animals. But the level of unprofessional investigating into this story, the Waddy Werewolf will live on in the dark of the night on Ditto Road. Philip Spencer.
Is that the track?
I believe that would be the track, yes.
Yeah, that's from the WDRB website on the story.
Interesting. That is a huge track, my friend.
And that's the thing is, of course, it's going back, and again, the Fish and Wildlife, same thing in Monroe County.
Oh, so the Fish and Wildlife are back? Well, I'm assuming that everybody listening, if you've listened to our earlier episodes, knew what I was alluding to when I said that this case has a lot of similarities with the Monroe County mutilations.
Yeah, and I think we even maybe slightly mentioned this when we discussed Monroe. We talked about it happened in Shelbyville, but we didn't realize it was something.
Didn't we?
Yeah. In the quote from Fish and Wildlife was that the attack was indicative to a canine dog, a coyote, is more of an oblong ground. And this is Sergeant Doug Deathridge of the Fish and Wildlife.
Sure.
He's saying that one of the tracks left by an animal, if it was a big cat, it wouldn't show any tail marks at all. But they think it's a cat. Yeah, but again, they're going back to the domestic dog. And that's what, and they said the dog has likely been contained by its owner since there has been no more attacks.
Interesting. And you know, it's interesting that this Philip Spencer brings up this man who raises wolves on the same road. Why was that never looked into?
To me, that's very strange. Who raises wolves?
Who raises wolves, exactly? Don't you have to be like a federally protected agency to raise wolves? I didn't think you could just start raising wolves out in the wild by yourself. I mean, I guess you could. You can do anything if you don't care what happens to you, but...
Yeah. I just wonder if that isn't like some type of,
disinformation?
Yeah.
And it's like slightly leaked out, so, you know. But even that, man, the whole... If wolves were to have killed these creatures, they would have eaten them. That's what wolves do.
Exactly. And again, this goes back to like the Monroe County thing. Just mutilated.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I was about to say. This does go back to the Monroe County thing on the simple fact that those animals were not eaten either. Those animals were just killed and left.
Yeah. It is almost the exact
to a T.
Same scenario.
And man, it's like you said on the Monroe County episode, these things can be traced all throughout the state, you know, and Topics was an excellent place to do that, simply because we got immediate, somebody would post on there.
Right.
And actually, I'm pretty sure that this was on Topics, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah.
That's how we found out about it in the first place.
When I kind of did the polling of similar incidences in Kentucky.
But now that, you know, now we don't really have a place for people to report it immediately, and we also don't have a way of tracking, because just like you said in the first episode, and as you were starting to dig more up on it, no pun intended, with it being the dog man, that showed that it was a steady continuance, or almost like a Jeepers Creepers type thing, in which it would come, it would get a bunch of food, and it would drop off for a few years.
It'd go away for a while, then it'd come back, and maybe even come back in a different area.
Right.
But it seems to be a recurrent thing. But this is weird, I mean, because even you mentioned it, and then this WDRB mentioned it, that they had a town meeting to discuss this problem. Yeah. And if you're having a town meeting about
that's a pretty huge problem.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad problem. And you're just like saying, oh, nothing to worry about, nothing
it's
to
just
see
some
here.
dogs.
Yeah, and we just contained it. But they never say whose dog they were. Right. And if your dog attacks someone's cattle or wildlife, you're going to probably have to answer for that somehow. Legally.
Sure.
How come?
Well, hell, a lot of the times around here it causes huge rifts with neighbors because they shoot the dog.
Right.
And these people said that this thing was not a dog.
Right.
They said that they saw it.
And that doesn't, I mean, I'm not big on paw prints or anything else, but that doesn't really look like
right. Even that one, which according to Philip Spencer's blog, the one that they use with the WDRB is a domestic dog. They may have replaced that one.
Yeah.
But that still looks like a huge footprint.
Yeah. And you know what? That looks very similar to the footprint in Monroe County.
Very much so. I hadn't thought about that, but it really does. Yeah. That is huge.
Yeah.
So not only this case do we find the Waddy Werewolf, but there's another case on Kentucky Bigfoot. And this actually occurs in Shelbyville, Kentucky. Now, did they say Waddy was close to Shelbyville? Is that what they said?
Yeah, actually, yeah. It's in Shelby County, and Shelbyville is the county seat.
And they're like Shelbyville and Louisville are almost...
Yeah, almost connected there, yeah.
So this woman, though, sees this thing at 9 o'clock at night. She's walking her dog. She is standing in her driveway, and these two dogmen are walking up her driveway at her. She says at one point that they tried to hide behind a bush, and which is odd anyway. Why would these dogmen try to hide behind a bush? But they tried to hide behind a bush, and this is when her dog sees it. Her dog freaks out, doesn't do anything, is frozen in terror, which, I mean, if you know dogs, they don't do that. They start barking.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, the reports of this Waddy Werewolf go back. I mean, there's plenty of reports of this. I'm going to say it for the 6th time on this episode. Kentucky has a huge werewolf problem.
Yeah.
Just a bad werewolf problem, man.
And it seems like it's, statewide.
Oh, yeah.
It isn't confined.
Right.
And there's the print from Monroe County.
Monroe County, yeah. Looks very similar to it.
And there's the print.
Almost exactly the same thing.
Yeah. So I believe it was the same. I'm not no Fish and Wildlife officer, but...
But, man, I mean, when you are having people describe to you a dog man or a werewolf, and they're saying, we watched this thing kill our goats.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, well, what you saw was a pack of domesticated animals or a coyote.
Right. It not only that, but you're having multiple people who do not know each other, who's not connected in different parts of the state, having the exact same experience, reporting similar signs.
Exactly.
And they're just being wrote off. Oh, no, that's a human killing that. This is Monroe County.
Sure.
And it was a dog or,
Well, I mean, it's even implied on Philip Spencer's blog here. They're saying it was obviously a human who did this.
Right.
But the people who watched it happen say it was not a human at all.
Right.
And not only that, but just to touch on this briefly, we've got a lot of coyotes around here.
Right. I get them on the game camera all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, I see them. Like, I see them when I go out to feed the dogs and the cats at night. Like, they howl all night in the woods. Mm-hmm. They're out in the fields. Man, unless it's a pack of coyotes that has all went rabid, which if they're all rabid, then you're definitely going to see some signs of break-ins.
Right.
There's no way that coyotes did this.
No.
Coyotes are almost scared of humans enough that they wouldn't even come around a human dwelling to get a goat. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Unless it's starving or it's hungry. And even at that point, you're going to see tracks everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's going to break down a fence, or they're going to hop a fence, or, there's going to be signs of it. So.
And, and the guy, I guess, go back on the guy raising the wolves.
Yeah.
What about that, kind of what you're talking about, if maybe he summons in something?
Amen, man. Which brings me to my next theory. We have these big wolves that they're talking about here, which these are quadrupedal. They walk on all fours, or at least the description of these types of wolves. But we have this similar description with Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
And when, I can't remember the family's name, but when the family it's not Spencer's, it's something like that though. But when they first moved onto the Skinwalker Ranch, the very first day they were there, this frickin' 6-foot wolf walks up to them and is playful and wants to play with them and is rolling around with them. And then all of a sudden it just walks up to one of their cows and sticks its head in its mouth. So they pop it 3 times and it just looks at them, and then they pop it again with a buckshot and it just kind of saunters off.
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of people think, obviously with the name Skinwalker Ranch, that thing is a skinwalker. It's a witch doctor who has learned how to form into the shape. So, maybe that's what we're dealing with in Kentucky. Maybe this guy who's raising these wolves is a skinwalker. And he's using this wolf thing as a, And not only that, but we see these dogmen, probably the most famous dogman case right now is the Beast of Bray Road, who Seth Breedlove just released the documentary on, who Linda Godfrey helped do a lot of research on. And actually, she's what led me first, the Kentucky Dogman thing. In the Beast of Bray Road, they talk about these open fields of bodies that they just happen to stumble across, and how, maybe some of the townspeople or some of the people in charge were not only covering it up, but were helping summon it. Right. Maybe these dogmen are something that's been summoned, or something that's been,
And it'd be interesting, over in Monroe County, if there isn't maybe some type of explanation for that.
Right.
If maybe someone raising wolves or something similar over there.
Some type of skinwalker, some type of... Right.
Right.
But all of this, of course, leads to, I think, what is probably one of mine and your favorite cryptids at the moment, which is the Land Between the Lakes beast.
Right.
Which Stephen and I talked a lot about on the Monroe County episode. And now I'm not even sure if... I hate to say this about our good friend, but I'm not even sure if the Land Between the Lakes beast is so special. Or if it just happens to be one of these many creatures who's roaming around Kentucky.
Yeah. Even some of the descriptions of Land Between the Lakes monster is similar to this dogman. They refer to it as the Land Between the Lakes dogman.
Yeah. Right. And I fully plan on doing a full show on the Land Between the Lakes beast, because there's a lot there. But we have the same things: animals being killed, it chasing people. Hell, we even have one report of an entire family being killed in the 80s in the Land Between the Lakes area by the Land Between the Lakes beast. So, yeah, for sure. I mean, the dogmen are a prominent feature of Kentucky cryptidism.
You're right.
Cryptopia.
Right. And it seems to be, as I said earlier, from the whole portion of the state, from western to eastern.
Right.
So, I mean, there has to be numerous of these, or they're traveling across the state,
Packs of dogmen.
Packs
of dogmen.
Something of that nature.
Or is it that they're summoning one dog creature? Or is it, is this thing a metaphysical, esoteric, occult type creature?
Right.
A demon of some type, for lack of a better word, that's being summoned to these different places?
Yeah.
Or has there been a portal opened up in a cave somewhere, and that's why,
That's a good...
But again, they really follow that cave structure of Kentucky.
They do, yeah.
Very much so. But
it seems like, it always either a cave structure, the forest or set up a body of water as a river, like Cumberland River.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of sightings and parts of that goes along that river.
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. Which, talking about that cave system, that cave structure, probably is a good segue into our last of these off-the-wall Kentucky cryptids. And this is the least of the one-offs. Actually, this is a pretty reoccurring creature, almost to the point of being reoccurring like the Dogman is. And we've alluded to them all episode, but what I'm talking about here is the Kentucky Goblins.
Yes.
Now, these guys, probably the most prominent sighting of the Kentucky Goblins is the 1955 Hopkinsville encounter, which I'm sure if you're into ufology or cryptids or Kentucky history whatsoever, you guys are probably familiar with it. Not going to spend a lot of time on it, and also we'll probably do a more in-depth episode on that at a later date. But just as some history, August 21st, 1955, I believe was the date. Regardless, August of 1955, the Sutton family has this encounter with these goblins. Police officers in the area reported the UFO first. They saw it. Lucky Sutton, I believe, was the one who goes out to the well and sees this UFO either landing or crashing. Can't really be determined which. He comes back to the house. He tells his family. They all think he's kind of joking around until these little creatures, about 2 to 3 feet tall, right? 2 to 3 feet tall with these pointy ears start jumping on their windows and start, pecking on their windows and looking through the glass of the doors. Now they, as I guess anybody would do, the Suttons start pulling out their shotguns and start firing at these creatures. And they say that when they hit them, they make a tink like you would hear hitting a tin can, but they roll up in a ball and they roll off when they're shot. So a battle kind of ensues with these creatures. They try and grab Lucky by the hair at one point off the roof of the house. But primarily, everybody freaks out and they drive into town. They get the sheriff's department out there. The sheriffs, of course, are making fun of them. But when the sheriffs come out there, they find a large crop circle-like deal, where the UFO supposedly lands or whatever. And they also find this bioluminescent liquid that's said to have come off the aliens when they shot them. So, that's pretty much the end of that encounter. The next night they come back, they shoot at them again, and then they're never seen again by the Suttons. And this case has some discrepancies, yes, but all of these people that were involved in this case, there were 11 different people at the farmhouse who all say they saw the same thing. The matriarch of the family, whose name escapes me at the moment, was a very trusted woman in the community, very well known for not making things up, very straightforward woman. So not only is this case probably the biggest case in Kentucky around UFOs and aliens, but it was also the genesis of a lot of popular culture around cryptids and UFOs. This was the idea for Steven Spielberg's E.T. This is what gave him the idea for that. The producers told him it was a little too frightening, and I think he turned it down a little bit. This was the creature design for the Pokemon Sebille, which was not one of the original 150, which is kind of where I dropped off. But Sebille's enough to make me pick it up again. It was the creature design for the movie Gremlins, the Mogwai. They were based off the Kentucky Goblins. And not only that, but it's pretty much commonly agreed upon that the little green men moniker that we give to aliens these days came from the Kelly, Kentucky incident.
Right.
So, but that being said, this is not at all where this story ends. And this is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. There's a researcher by the name of Greg and Dana Newkirk. They run the paranormal, the traveling museum of the paranormal. Really good people. Met them at Crypticon. Talked to them a little bit about this. But they had received an email in 2009 to a defunct account. They were ghost researchers. They received an email from one of their old email accounts. They had kind of moved on from this project, and it was from this fellow who said he was from County, right?
Yeah, Pike County.
And that's opposite Hopkinsville. Like, that's across the state.
Yeah, that's completely on the other side, yeah.
So he says that he's from Pike County, and he's having goblins. The same type of goblins described in the Hopkinsville case. He's having these goblins attack his house, and they're freaking out his kid, and his kid's talking about, seeing him in his room, and he's like, something's got to be done about this. Can't have these fucking goblins breaking in my house. So they take his dog at one point. I mean, just crazy stuff. So Greg Newkirk says, we'd love to talk to you about it, but we do more ghosts than goblins, So the guy emails him back and says, well, what do you think about this? And he sends him a photo of this 3-toed foot with these dermal ridges. So again, Greg's not really all that up on cryptids and Bigfoot at this point, but being a ghost researcher, he knows some people who are. So he takes these photos of these footprints to one of his Bigfoot research friends, and they tell him these dermal ridges in here, which are like the fingerprints almost of the footprint, almost prove that this could not have been hoaxed. These dermal ridges are legit shit. It's, like I said, it's almost like the fingerprints. It's almost like trying to fake fingerprints.
Right.
So at that point, the guy's like, come down, talk to us, let's figure this out. So Greg's making, plans to go down there, and the guy messaged him back the following day and says, no, man, we need you down here now. These things are breaking into my house. We've got photos of them on the game camera. And he sends him one of these photos, and it's of this little goblin creature hiding behind this tree. Not a great photo, but definitely some strangeness to it. And it definitely looks like a little goblin hiding behind a tree.
Right.
So Greg decides to go down here. And at this point, and I'll include the original article from Week in Weird, because this is a massive story and goes into a lot of strange shit. But at this point, Greg is not giving the name of this Kentucky town. I assume because he knows that if he did, other researchers would flock to it and get a story before he does.
Right.
And I mean, I can't blame him for that, because I do the same thing. But, so they go to this town, and they start talking to these people. And nobody knows of this guy. Well, when they reach the town, this guy has completely cut off correspondence with them. Has ghosted them, for lack of a better word. And so Greg decides, well, I'm still going to go down there. We're still going to go down there. We're still going to check it out. I think I know where this guy lives. So we're still going to go investigate. So they get down to this town, which pretty confident now is Hellier, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Where Stephen and I are most positive that the town he's referring to is Hellier. In Pike County, right? Hellier's in Pike County.
Yeah, it's in Pike County. Right on, almost close to the Virginia border.
Yeah, right on the edge. So they go to Hellier, and nobody in the town knows of this guy who had contacted Greg. And they said, and I learned all of this from a podcast I didn't learn all of this from a podcast, but there's a really great podcast on this that I listened to today to kind of refresh my memory. It's called the UFO Mod Pod. It's episode 3 of that podcast, and Greg and Dana are both on there talking about it. But anyway, they go to Hellier, and they're just, screaming this dude's name from the mountaintops, essentially. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows this guy. And in Hellier, a small town, and you would think somebody
someone would know him, yeah.
Right. Especially him saying that he was a doctor. And that was part of the story. He had told Greg he was a doctor, and that was part of the reason he didn't want his name to be let out. But the weird thing is that everybody in Hellier has some form of contact with these creatures. When he started talking about these creatures, people started talking about them running around the roads in front of them, and bodies being found on their own property, and cave systems, and them coming out of the caves on other people's property. So they even report this UFO, like we were talking about before, being in the skies over Hellier for like 4 hours one afternoon. And again, I'll include all the links to this podcast into Greg's website. He's a really good investigator, one of my heroes in the field. In this whole thing, it gets much, much, much weirder. And we won't go into that very much on this podcast. It's looking like the next episode we do is actually going to be about Hellier. On January 19th, though, Greg and his production team are releasing a documentary called Hellier about his experience with this case, about what exactly happened with this case. It's going to be on Amazon Prime, a bunch of other stuff. I'll include the trailer and the notes on that in the show notes. But it looks like he's finally ready to blow this whole thing up and let us know what's going on. So, but that's, again, it's a consistent, and Greg even says this himself. He's like, what's the connection between something that happened in 1955 and happened in 2009?
Yeah.
Well, the connection maybe is that not only did it never stop, but it happened long before 1955.
Exactly.
And it all surrounds these cave systems that lie under Kentucky and that run all the way through the state.
Yeah. I definitely think it's something definitely connected between what's going on in Pike County and what happened in Hopkinsville. The interesting side note about Hopkinsville is Fort Campbell is right there.
I had forgot about that. Yeah.
So,
And there is a lot of people who think that maybe, and Greg Newkirk being one of them, who think that maybe the Mothman, or no, I'm sorry, Greg Newkirk doesn't think this. Seth Breedlove thinks this. Or this is one of his many theories, that maybe the Mothman was a military psyop.
Yeah.
Could the Goblins be a military psyop?
Very well, but Pike County, I don't.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But that also, there's a little bit more to the story with the guy who first kind of recommended Greg to this guy who's seen these goblins. Can't remember his name, but when Greg does a little research, he finds out that this guy pops up in these old UFO books, like these weird 70s UFO books. Paul Rist, I believe, is this guy's name.
Okay.
And he claims to be a guy who, after the Vietnam War, went into these caves and exterminated underground bases of aliens. This Paul Rist guy, who Greg says, I've never heard of this guy before in my life. But Paul Rist is supposedly the fellow who recommends this homeowner, this property owner who's seeing all these goblins. He's the one who recommends that he talk to Greg Newkirk in the first place. Then when he gets the name of this guy, this guy tells him, Paul Rist recommended me to you. Greg starts doing research and finds out that this guy is supposedly somebody who has been eradicating these underground aliens since he got back from Vietnam.
See, that's crazy. And if you go into the underground portion of it, maybe the cave systems is how they're coming up to the surface. And
there's always been that talk of underground bases and underground cave systems. I mean, that's a reoccurring thing with the alien mythology.
And this kind of goes back on something we discussed probably the last couple of podcasts, was the booms we're hearing.
The mystery boom, sure, yeah.
How do we know that isn't some type of underground base making that sound?
Or, how do we know that that's not another portal opening up?
Right.
Like, the boom is what we hear when these portals open.
Then these things come across.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And we'll go way more into this case in the next episode. Actually, we're kind of planning a little review of the documentary series in the next one, along with just a little bit more about the whole return of the Kentucky Goblins case. Because honestly, this is a case that I've wanted to talk about since we started Midnight in Kentucky. This is one of the cases that, and I've always been in love with this type of stuff, but when I read about this case, it reignited my fire for all of this study. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Kentucky Goblins in the next episode, but it's just interesting to see how the cave system plays so heavily into them,
right,
as well as, the dogmen, as well as all of these other cryptids that we talked about this episode.
Yeah.
But in conclusion, do you think there's any connection between all these creatures? Why do you think Kentucky is so bogged down with all of these, whatever they are?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, Kentucky does have a lot of, Kentucky is, it ain't one of the less populated states, but it's probably maybe a state that doesn't have, as far as when you're going east, that has kind of unoccupied landmass. A lot of farmland, a lot of forest. Sure. We have a lot of rivers and lakes. We do have national parks here. We have Mammoth Cave. We have the National Forest, Daniel Boone, Line Between the Lakes. We have a lot of different things, but the cave system, I think, is what makes it unique.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's maybe what draws them. And who knows, if there is like underground things that's going on,
sure,
that might be where they're coming out of at some point.
So, do you think that the goblins and the dogmen are connected, or do you think that the dogmen and the goblins are two totally different things that just happen to live in the same?
I don't know if they're connected or not. What about you? Do you think they're connected?
I think if they are, then they're all connected through the basis of when these portals open, these are the types of creatures that come through.
Yeah.
Like, they may all be inhabitants of these other dimensions, but I'm sure people are going to get tired of me saying extra dimensions because that's pretty much my, that's my go-to.
Yeah.
So, I think if they are connected, then they either all come out of these one, this one place, or, I don't know. What is interesting, though, is Greg Newkirk talked about his theory a little bit on this podcast, which I'll include in the show notes, about aliens. And he says that he thinks that these things that we see, like the Greys or the reptilians or whatever, they're not necessarily aliens themselves, but they are like the meat puppets for something that cannot interact with us in its true form. And, oddly enough, I've heard that said about the dogmen. I've heard that said about Sasquatch. I've heard a lot of people say that about different cryptids. So maybe whatever all of these things are, it's something that cannot connect with us on that level in its true form, so it shows us a different form.
Right. That's a good theory.
I thought it was
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty good theory. And I mean, it can still go to the whole extra dimensional thing,
Right.
And it honestly goes to when the whole Mothman thing was happening, and when Woody, I can't remember his last name, saw this Indrid Cole character, the one who landed in front of him and got out, and Woody asked him something along the lines of, why do you look like me, or why do you look like this? And he said, I take this form because this is how you can see me.
Yeah.
And isn't there something in the Bible where God says, or where an angel or something says, I take this form because this is the way?
Something like that. Yeah, I can't remember where it's at, but it does seem like there is something to that.
So maybe these things take these forms because either A, it's the way that they want to be seen. In the case of the Dogman, I can't imagine anything thinking, well, I'm going to take the form of a Dogman because that's comforting.
Right.
But maybe that's the way it wants to be seen in that instance,
Yeah.
And again, we see all of this paranormal phenomenon really fucking with our consciousness and the way that we perceive the real world.
Yeah.
The real world in quotation marks. Yeah. Maybe it's nothing more than consciousness expressed on that level, or, consciousness. I don't know. I've never been a big believer of these are just animals that have not been discovered.
Yeah, I'm not really on that.
I don't think that the Dogman is an animal that hasn't been discovered.
No.
I think it's something that maybe has been summoned by somebody.
Yeah.
Purposely or not purposely. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I can say without a doubt that something is going on in the caves.
Oh, yeah.
Of Kentucky.
There's something going on there.
And I can say without a doubt we've got a real goblin problem and we've got a real Dogman problem.
Yeah. We've got a lot of problems.
We've got a lot of problems here.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, feel free to call me out here. I don't think there's any other state in the Union that has had as many conflicting and well-documented cryptid reports of all different types of cryptids than Kentucky does.
No, it seems like we got them all.
I mean, but I don't know why. I don't understand why. I think the caves might have a lot to do with it. I think our waterways might have a lot to do with it. I think, our remoteness may have a lot to do with it. But and again, a lot of these other things connect with a lot of the things that we've talked about in earlier episodes and about things we'll continue to talk about. But it's just very fascinating to see all these different types of creatures being documented over and over and over and over.
By multiple people in multiple parts of the state.
Right. So, give y'all a second to digest all of that information. We're going to take a real quick break, and we will be back after this.
laughs at God in a hospital. No one laughs at God in a war. No one's laughing at God when they're starving or freezing or so very cold. No one laughs at God when a doctor calls after some routine tests. No one's laughing at God when it's gotten real late. Their kid's not back from that party yet.
It's like the last 5 years, every day's a war. Honestly, sometimes I wonder what I fight for. Then I think, what am I thinking? These ain't a warrior's thoughts. You keep moving or you get put down, dog. I pull myself up, but keep my head low. Taking punches to the gloves, back to the ropes. That's when I press on, that's when I lean in. That's when I get this old familiar feeling. Like I'm invincible, like I am infinite. Like I'm running this war zone I'm living in. Like I am powerful, like I am limitless. Y'all already know that I ain't never giving in, but that don't mean that I ain't never wanted to. Like what do you do when your dude dies in front of you? Like what do you do when the worst has happened? Maybe God's a comedian and nobody's laughing.
No one laughs at God in a hospital. No one laughs at God in a war. No one's laughing at God when they're starving or freezing or so very cold. No one laughs at God when the cops knock on their door and they say, "We got some bad news, sir." No one's laughing at God when there's a famine, fire, or flood.
Look,
But God could be
I've met the devil, brown hair, brown eyes. And when I looked into them, they reflected back mine. Danced with her before, almost ending my life. Don't know why I thought I would try a second time. We were born on a blood moon, under a bad sign. But we were both doing our best just to live right. But we were day and night, prayer and blasphemy. Demons and angels fight for dominion inside of me. I know I can't give in, but I think she did. Send her angels away and let the demons win. I still think about her when I've had too much. Blackout, come to asking if she showed up. And he's like, nah man, was she supposed to? But I'm back out before he gets through. And I do my best just to laugh it all off. But what do you do when the laughing stops?
No one laughs at God in a hospital. No one laughs at God in a war. No one laughing at God in a hospital. No one's laughing at God in a war. No one's laughing at God when you're starving or freezing or so very cold.
Listen. Now I am not laughing, shit is real out here. I don't know where this life will lead me in a year, or in a month, or even in a week, man. I need a blunt, a good girl, and fast plan, or the other way around, whichever works. Praying for strength in the words of a rap verse, that I see her again before I see a hearse. That I go and know, man, if they don't get me first. Heard they was asking about us just the other day, what we were doing, who we chilled with, and where we stay. Tell them we're right here, and we're waiting on them. Death over dishonor, not a threat, it's a promise. And I don't wanna die, at least not yet. But if you're shooting at us, know we gonna shoot back. I try to keep my head, but it's getting harder. I ain't a wise man, but I'm getting smarter.
No one laughs at God when their airplane starts drawing control of their shape. No one's laughing at God when they see the one they love hand in hand with someone else and they hold their mistake. No one laughs at God when the cops knock on their door and they say, "We got some bad news, sir." No one's laughing at God when there's a famine, fire,
Just laughing to keep from crying, man.
but God could be funny when told to give you money if you just pray the right way. When you present him like a genie with his magic like bikini, or grand such as Jimmy the Crick and Santa Claus. God can be so hilarious, ha
Just
ha,
laughing to keep from crying.
ha ha.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us talk about this crazy bullshit this evening. We appreciate it. And listen, if you can, do us both a favor and visit us on Facebook, visit us on Twitter, leave reviews on iTunes, bring us feedback. If you hate it, if you love it, let us know. We just want to hear what you guys think about it. Obviously, we have had some sound issues in the past. Hopefully, we've got that sorted out. Hopefully, that won't be happening no more. And we can continue to bring you this type of content, fully audible, fully ready to go. Like we said, next week's episode is going to be kind of a review of the Hellier film, kind of just more in-depth into the Kentucky Goblins phenomena. And then we've got some other cool stuff lined up that's in the same vein as all this. But stay tuned for sure. Visit us on Twitter, visit us on Facebook, leave us ratings, leave us reviews, interact with us, tell us your stories. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben.
I'm Steven.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good night.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook.
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.